Welcome back to Breaking Down Storage Tech. Today we're breaking down a lazy box merger by Math Dragon. So let's get straight into it. So the system is 2 wide AB tileable, and the only reason it's AB tileable is because you have to tile the rails and the slime and honey properly, because otherwise if these rails aren't the same, they won't match, and if these are the same, they will just pull together and it will be a whole nightmare. So that's really the only difference between the two slices. So I've broken out one of the 2 wide tileable slices to get into to further explain how this works in a more basic way of understanding. So what a box merger is. A box merger is basically, if I have a box like this right here, and I have another box like this right here, if I put these both in, I want a box merger takes the items up from here, puts them into here, gives me this box, and give me this box right here. So that way I have an empty shulker box and then my shulker box with both of the items. So that way I save on shulker boxes, which is great. So if we get into it, there is this main input right here. This is the main input. This is the main input for here. And one thing to note is that this does not have any filters or anything like that. If you accidentally put in 2 different items, it will filter or go through both those items, and it will kind of break the whole system depending on the fill level of each of the 2 items. So this has to be individually monitored by using whatever system you want to have, whether that's a box sorter or probably a box sorter realistically. But yeah, that has to be done outside of the system. This system just assumes that you get all of the same item type. So what happens is you get the item type in here and it goes to the hopper. The hopper gets a comparator readout from it, which powers this observer or this dropper right here, which will power this observer, powering this rail line right here. And by powering this rail line, it powers this observer, so it shoots out from this dispenser right here. Now, what will happen then is once the shulker box gets shot up from the dispenser, it's placed right here. And once the item or the shulker box is right here, one item will be taken out from this hopper right here, which pulls out the item almost immediately. And that causes this comparator to take a readout because there's now something in the hopper. So it'll power this block, which will unpower this redstone torch. By unpowering this redstone torch, it will cause this dropper to unpower. And I know it's a very weird powering right here. This is quasi connectivity at its finest, and it's just a really weird thing to look at. Like, especially if you're new to redstone, this connection makes absolutely 0 sense. But essentially this redstone torch right here is powering this block right here, which is powering this dropper right here. And basically what happens is this unpowers, so it'll send a signal right here, and that doesn't really have too much importance apart from the fact that it'll power this dropper and this dropper, but that'll be important in a second, but it isn't important for the startup sequence. So it will also power this block, or power this note block right here because of this comparator powering this block, so it'll power this right here. This will cause the observer here to take a readout, which will break it, or break the shulker box that is here, and push the shulker box into this slice right here. So you right now have items just buffered in this hopper right now, and a shulker box in this hopper right here. Now, normally, if the system was running normally, it would go down here, but right now this hopper is actually locked from this redstone torch getting power to it, so it will just stay in this hopper and be pushed into this dropper right here. Now, as soon as this dispenser has any items in it, it will power this comparator, which will power this block, which will power this note block, and then this note block. And that sends 2 main signals, one to this system right here, and one to this system right here. One thing that it does is it powers this observer, which will power the dispenser and shoot it out. And if you look here, it will power this piston, but I think the timing is just right, so it will break this and then power the dispenser. We can actually test this right now if I just take an empty shulker block. Yeah, so it won't actually fire, which is quite weird. I think the timing is just right, but wait, I'm gonna push this thing right here. So another thing it does is what you just saw there. It will power this note block, which will power this observer, powering this white concrete, which will power this activator rail, powering this entire stack downwards. which will send another signal because of this observer powering this block right here through this signal. But at the same time, it also powers this repeater, which will power this observer, powering this block, which will power this observer and this piston and this note block right here. And I believe what will actually happen is it will power this note block, and this will fire before this note block updates, so this won't get a second update. Now, what happens then is that this composter moves down. So this is essentially the system to check that, okay, there is a hopper, or not a hopper, there is a shulker box right here in place, and we can put items into the system, and we don't have to recycle anything or start a new box into the system. How this works is the observer, or the comparator, or this composter will be moved down to here, to this block right here, which will take this comparator, or we'll take an output from this comparator, which will be powering this block. This block, first of all, unpowers this redstone torch, which we'll talk about in a second of why it unpowers this hopper. But it will also power this hot repeater right here, so it will lock this hopper right here, meaning that any box with any items in it, right, or like for example, if I go here, or if I put it right here, ooh, that is, oh wait, never mind. That was not working because it has to come through this dispenser first. So once there's something in this dispenser, that will power the system, and now this bottom hopper is locked. That was my bad. Now, what happens then is that this shulker box, you can have items in it, and it will be powering stuff, but basically it won't get down. Now, this is where the power comes from, or the second half of this tileable part comes into, or not second tileable thing, but like the next kind of checker statement. Basically, when this shulker box has items in it, it will power this comparator here, right here, which will power this block right here, which will unpower this redstone torch, allowing for this whole thing to come back. So we can actually simulate that right now, and it will bring this whole thing back, and it will also keep this activator rail powered. Now, that's important for the firing of the system, but we'll just talk about that in a second because there's so many things that happen in the system when boxes get cycled. But basically, once this gets powered enough, this system will be, this system's basically taking a power readout from this, which will power this observer every time the signal updates, which will always constantly pulse this dropper. And this dropper is technically a buffer for the system, so it will buffer one box until the fill level of the previous or the next box changes at all. But that's not too important because if you're running the system properly, you won't really have a buffer at all, unless you have like a very limited supply of items. But basically what happens is this redstone wire takes a constant output from this redstone comparator that essentially checks if the fill level is always full. And how this works is kind of weird, but basically when the fill level is full, it will power into this comparator, which is also taking a readout from this composter right here. So it'll only take a readout when this block or this signal takes a readout of 15 from the fill level of the shulker box, which will then power this comparator, powering this dropper, powering this repeater right here, powering this repeater, and pushing this whole system back up. Now, when the system pushes the whole thing back up, it unlocks this hopper right here and also powers this observer, which will power this note block, powering this note block, which will power this observer, which will break the box, allowing the shulker box in its full form to drop down into this hopper and go through the system, and then recycle the whole system using the same previous power thing, because it will power this and allow another box to be spit out if another box happens to make it into the dispenser. So if there's other boxes in the dispenser, it will keep powering, but it won't really matter because this will stay powered. But if this observer moves up, it will power this block or this note block right here, breaking the box and sending a signal to the dispenser right here, because it'll power this observer, which sends the second signal all the way up here and resets the system. Now, that's a lot for this side, but there's a bit that mainly has to do with the logic when it comes to this side. So basically, when there is a box right here, any items that go through the previous system we talked about at the beginning of the video will just get spat out into this block, this airspace, this block right here. So the shulker box will get placed right here, and it will start feeding into this shulker box right here. And because they will take an output, they will power this the comparator right here, which will unpower this redstone torch. But what that does